So without further ado, let's start the first of the presentations. And I would like to hand over to Rufus Howard from Greenfriars Limited, who will tell us all about the reason why we should think and act on becoming carbon neutral now, not tomorrow, but now. So Rufus, can I please hand over to you?
So, as Claire said, my name's Rufus Howard. I'm the director of Greenfriars Limited Sustainability Consultancy. I've got about 20 years experience as a consultant working for numerous consultancies and government departments. Today I'm going to talk about why carbon neutrality is essential for your business. And I'm going to do that through three main lenses. I'm going to say, what is it? Why should we care? And what should we do about it? So start with what is carbon neutral. Very simply, there's a definition there. Being carbon neutral involves calculating your total climate damaging carbon emissions, reducing them where possible, and then balancing your remaining emissions. That was the New Oxford American Dictionary definition when it was Word of the Year in 2006, so quite a while ago now. But we're still waiting for it to catch on. So why should we care? Well, put simply, you're all aware of global warming and climate change, but how does that affect us here in Kent? Well, you can see there a quick graph which very easily shows you the issue in terms of global warming. And what does that translate into for our businesses and people here in Kent? Well, increased flooding, frequency and severity. Increased sea level rise, ocean acidification, ocean warming, reducing fish stocks, coastal erosion, threatening low-lying areas. Reduced rainfall, increased drought, effects on crops and agriculture. Increased forest fire and the negative consequences of that. Reduced availability of foodstuffs, supply chain disruption, trade disruption. Reduced water resources for drinking, agriculture and other uses. Increased frequency and severity of storms and coastal storms. And the overall impact of all of those will exacerbate existing resource stresses, leading to increased global conflict, which will lead to, as we've seen in Ukraine, destruction, and ultimately increase in mass migration, refugees, and human suffering, frankly. So that's the very obvious problems of climate change. So what I want to do before going on to the carbon neutral stuff is talk about the wider context, that climate is just one aspect of sustainability. And both the climate issues and the sustainability issues are really underpinned by growth. And by growth, I mean growth in human population and consumption and development. And this chart shows the population growth and against that the extinction rate, because we have a biodiversity crisis as well as a climate crisis. And those extinctions are being driven by land use change, habitat loss, pollution, and effectively the expansion of human development. So this isn't a new problem. 1972, Club of Rome commissioned the Limits of Growth report by Meadows et al. And what they did was they did a computer simulation. They said, if we continue with development in the main methods that we're doing now, and based on the data we have, and based on the fact that we have finite resources in terms of minerals, fossil fuels, land surface, potable water, etc., what will be the consequence? And what their modelling showed was that the effect of business as usual will be, over time, a collapse in the availability of resources, food production, industrial output, and ultimately population. And this has been redone since, and the trends are pretty much the same, whichever way you look at it. So we do need to move to work with the resources we have. And just to illustrate that, if you look at the critical minerals and metals that we use in our modern society, these are the days when the sort of amounts run out over time. You can see that we do not have infinite resources. And a simplified way of thinking about this is saying about sort of how many Earths are we using. And ultimately, if you average it out, we're using about 1.7 Earths worth of materials per person. It's actually a lot higher in the US. I think it's 5.5. I think in the UK it's around 3. Don't quote me on that. And I think in India it's less than 1. But ultimately, if you average it out, if you say we're using about 1.7 Earths worth of materials, we don't have 1.7 Earths quite clearly. We just have the 1. And if you look at Earth Overshoot Day, that's the day at which we move. We've gone out with the sort of reproductive capacities of the planet, and we're actually eating into our finite capital reserves. And that's now as early as August each year. So if you think about that in a UK context, if we are using 3 planets worth of materials per person, then we need to reduce that by 2/3. So think about that practically. Could you reduce your gas, your electric, your petrol, food, your costs by 2/3? That's the sort of challenge that we're talking about. So what are we doing around this? Well, obviously you're all aware of the COP and the Paris Agreement, etc. The bad news is that we're already here, 1.2, and the agreed sort of avoiding the worst of climate change is about 1.5. Now, if everyone carries on with the things they've already committed to, we're looking at between 2 and 3.6, and this is all above 2 is sort of bad news in terms of all those impacts that I mentioned earlier. If people hit the 2030 targets, it's slightly better, but still bad. If they hit the pledges, which aren't the kind of binding targets, then it's better still, but still not good. And then, if we're being really optimistic and say everyone really pushes on, and even then it's between 1.5 and 2.4. So you've still got the climate impacts. And effectively, what we're seeing now is that we've known climate change is a problem for some time, but what we're really talking about now is the pace is going to have to rapidly increase. So we're seeing an acceleration of decarbonisation agenda. And we're already talking about race to net zero. That word race is a key. It is now urgent. So everything's going to happen much more rapidly. And that's something that I want to come on to. So moving back to Kent, the Kent Environment Strategy, I think it was 2016 to 2020, recognised this and had a number of targets and set the direction for travel in Kent. There's a couple of figures I want to just highlight in there. So 55,000 people employed in low carbon environmental goods, 18% of waste going to landfill, 1,300 odd renewable energy installations, and 14,000 environmental volunteers. This was 2016 data. But if we look at I think this is the 2020 or 2021 sort of indicator report from Ken. So what we can see is those low carbon employees has gone up to about 70,000. So we can see the direction of travel there, and the number of low carbon businesses has increased significantly, as you can see there. Let's look at a few of the other indicators. So total CO2 emissions from, this is Kent Industry and Commercial, it's going in the right direction, i.e. down. Unfortunately, some issues are still getting worse. That's air quality there, getting worse. Hopefully, with an acceleration of electric vehicles, we'll reduce some of those air quality issues, particularly if we can move to encourage pedestrianisation, low carbon emission zones, sustainable travel hubs, etc. Biodiversity, not going so well. Still only 41% of sites in positive conservation management. I know there's a lot of work going on at the moment around biodiversity net gain, the Environment Act, and nature recovery strategies, but still plenty of work to be done on the biodiversity side. This one's talking about the volunteers. What I like about this, particularly for businesses, is it's indicating a change in the public's appetite and mood around environmental and social. It's almost a threefold increase, Kent's reporting in volunteers. And bear in mind, volunteers is quite an extreme level of engagement because you're actually sort of getting out of the house and going and do stuff for free. And that's the tip of the iceberg. So for every one person who's volunteering, there'll be hundreds of people who are changing other habits, like changing their buying preferences around more ecologically friendly options. This is mirrored in our electrical vehicle registrations, going right up, as you can see, and some positive news around landfill reductions. That's down to 1.5 in Kent. So you can see things are moving, and they're moving quite rapidly in the direction of sort of green economy. Renewable energy capacity in Kent's going up, and annual energy consumption for the Kent Medway Local Authority estate is going down, still high, but going in the right direction. So what can businesses do? A lot of that was public sector and the public themselves. Well, as Fleur said, the answer is quite simple. It's go green, and you need to do that now. And to go Greta, if not you, who? If not now, when? So let's talk practically now, because businesses are very practical places. So I'm going to give you 5 steps here using the word green. So we're going to talk about green growth in this context, how we can become resilient and adapt to changing scenarios, efficiency and circularity in your business operations, ethical and environmental. And basically, when it comes to the internal business case, what you want to be making is a no regrets business case, which I will spell out. So green consumer growth, you saw some of those Kent figures. This is from the Financial Times. Green marketed products represent 10% of the market, but are showing 50% of the growth. That's a clear message for businesses. Likewise, eco-marketed consumer goods are trading at a premium, and there's plenty of evidence you can look up to support these figures. And I did a survey of Produced in Kent's members, 2,046 of them responded, and you can see there 2/3 already have some products or all products currently using sustainability credentials in their advertising and sales. And even more than that, nearly all were saying they'd like to increase their products and services sustainability credentials. This is coming from business owners in Kent. And when I said for the ones already doing it, do you see the benefits from those product services? The majority is saying there's benefits to brand identity, product differentiation, increased value or price premium, and increased sales. Some of them obviously saying it was hard to tell, but the trend there is clear. So talking about resilience and adaptation then, there's a few things I want to touch on. Obviously, you all know as business owners how important staff are and good staff. Attracting good staff, retaining good staff, and in this particular, we've got a labour crunch, is particularly difficult and critical to business operations. A lot of staff want to work for environmentally and socially responsible employers, and that will improve your attraction and retention. And if you're not doing that, then be sure they will look for similar employers who are providing that. In terms of consumer habits, I've already mentioned this, but people are increasingly looking at their own footprint in terms of what they're buying. They're looking at their environmental and social credentials of what they're buying. And therefore, if you're not aligned with these changing habits, as shown by those previous graphs, that's going to affect the business's resilience in terms of its bottom line. In terms of supply chain, your business, if it's producing products, is potentially part of someone else's supply chain. Increasingly, the purchasers are looking at their supply chain so that they can drive down carbon within their supply chain and also check environmental and social competence and capability within their supply chain. So if you don't raise your game, you could be losing out to other competitors in the supply chain. Likewise, in your own supply chain, you should be looking at how much of your carbon footprint is within your own supply chain? What are the environmental and social policies within your own supply chain? Do your due diligence, because this is going to be required increasingly as you move forward. In terms of green finance is massively outstripping non-green finance. If you're looking for loans, if you're looking, if you're a listed company, certainly as well, green finance is where the money is. That's where all of the growth is. And ultimately, as we've seen for some of the COVID bounce back stuff in Europe, ultimately all finance will be green in the end. So if you do not have the right credentials, if you've not got on top of this agenda, then you'll be restricting your access to investors and banks. Legislation and policy, I mentioned acceleration. Expect to see increasing taxes on non-sustainable products and services. Expect bans, as we've seen, on the incoming petrol and diesel cars in the future, also gas boilers, etc. These things will increase. And also there will be grants for early adopters, as we've seen in the past, for solar and other technologies. So there's upside as well as downside to the rapidly changing legislation, and you need to be ready to adapt and get ahead of those changes. In terms of your own operations, reducing your energy, your water, your materials and waste will all improve your bottom line and make you more competitive, and also reduce your carbon footprint and improve your sustainability. So making yourself lean is a smart move. So in terms of efficiency, I just said Green is lean. It's an old adage that time is money, and it certainly is for consultants and lawyers. But as a business owner, there's lots of other more practical things that cost you money. The gas you use costs you money. Your electricity is costing you money. Your water is costing you money. Your petrol in your fleet is costing you money. Your packaging, your waste. All of these things are affecting your bottom line. And in the traditional model, the linear economy, these are all inputs and they're effectively losses, and then you make your profits and you offset it, etc. In a recycling economy, you obviously become more efficient recycling some of those processes, but there's still a lot of waste. And ultimately, what we're moving towards is a circular economy. So to put that in the business perspective, instead of buying your energy, which is a pure cost, or reducing your energy use, which is good, but still a cost, if you've got on-site generation, you can not only cover your own costs, but you can sell the excess back to the grid, and therefore it becomes an income revenue stream rather than a cost item. Likewise, with your waste stream, instead of paying to get rid of your waste or recycling some of it, if your waste stream can become a feed stream for another business, you can get paid for your waste. These sort of principles are the way that people are going with industrial symbiosis, etc., to become circular within their business operations. In terms of being ethical and environmental with your business, it's good for your well-being as an individual. It's also good for your employees' well-being for the same reasons. It's good for your customers. We've talked about that earlier. They don't want to feel guilty using your products. It's good for your community because high environmental and social standards are good for everyone. It's good for nature for obvious reasons. And ultimately, all of that means it's good for humanity. So how do you then make the case within your business to move to a more aggressive environmental and social strategy and becoming carbon neutral? The internal business case for going green then. Number one, it's going to save you money. That's what your accountants are board are going to know. It is going to save you money. It's going to increase your sales. It's going to reduce your risk. It's going to improve your brand. It's therefore going to lead to a competitive advantage for your operations and a warm, fuzzy feeling, which is a bonus. So some quick steps. The later speakers are going to give you more detailed input on different aspects like measuring and offsetting, etc. But to give you some just quick tips, reduce your energy and insulate. It sounds obvious, but a lot of people still haven't done it. Switch to a green energy supply. Look at on-site renewables. Switch your fleet to electric vehicles. Reduce or change your packaging. Reduce your waste, your water consumption. Reuse, recycle, repurpose. You could spend the whole day talking about how you can improve your business, but there's some key, easy takeaways. Or, if that all sounds like a bit of a headache, you can hire a consultant who can do that for you. And I'm sure some of the people speaking later can advise on certain aspects of that. That's my presentation. Happy to now take questions. Well,
thank you very, very much, Rufus. That was very insightful. Whilst everybody else is still thinking up their questions, I have a couple to start with. I took away, of course, positives and negatives from this. Legislation, how quickly is that all going to change? You're saying it's not far off, but can you give us a bit more concrete? Are we thinking, is it months, years?
It's already in train. So the Environment Act has been passed. The 25-year environment plan is in play already. The car bans are already agreed. I don't know the exact dates of when the diesel and the petrol come out. I think it's 2035, but they're talking about reducing it to 2030. So just to give you one example, the biodiversity net gain, which is being consulted on now, will apply to town and country planning. So if you want to do a new planning development, build a new factory, etc., you're going to have to increase biodiversity by 10% over and above any sort of mitigation for your works there. So that's going to be a cost to your business, but a benefit to the environment and the wider community. So legislation is happening right now across the board.
Okay. A positive I took away is it's saving people money, and I think that's something that will find many listening ears. So could you give some concrete examples there, how it saves you money?
Absolutely. There's so much information out there on the business case. I know Kent's changed its street lights to LEDs, for example, Kent County Council, etc. And they've saved millions in terms of their annual electricity budget. There's so many examples. I mean, one I like to use is Adnams, the brewery that's in Southwold, I want to say. But when they rebuilt their brewery, they basically designed it to be passive, so they don't actually have any energy bills. It's passively the right temperature. The waste products that they have, they convert into biofuels, which goes into their trucks. The list goes on, but effectively, in the Adnams sort of case study, the head of sustainability, the sustainability badge was given to the head accountant, effectively the chief financial officer. So everything he did, I saw him speak, everything he did was based on finance rather than carbon or ecology, but all of it had environmental benefits. But ultimately, it was all supported by improvements to the bottom line.
It's financially driven. I have some questions coming in. Luke is asking, what do you mean by green funding and finance, and how do you actually check whether an investor or a bank is green? How do you check their green credentials?
Well, ultimately, at the moment, with investments and, say, pension funds, etc., there's been a bit of a wild west, and people will say this is an equitable fund or a green fund, and then you find out it's got oil and gas and weapons in it. So they're bringing in the European brought in this taxonomy, sustainable taxonomy. So they've really tightened up the rules. If you say it's an ethical fund, it now has a definition. If you say it's a sustainable fund, it now has a definition. But ultimately, the sustainable funds are outperforming the non-sustainable funds. They're less risky, they've got higher growth, better returns. And because the funds are now restricting themselves to say, well, we'll only invest in portfolios, loans, companies, etc., that meet these credentials, if you don't meet those credentials, your business, you're excluded from all of those funds, if that makes sense. Whereas the reverse is true. If you're a approved fund in the sustainable sort of matrix, then all of those pension funds globally might invest in your business because they're looking for green assets.
Okay, thank you. One more from Romney Marsh. Currently, there's no grant funding available to go solar. Will this change? And will there be a green credential certification for businesses to highlight the businesses that meet these credentials?
I think some of the other speakers are talking more about credentialing. In terms of grants, I was only reading today that there's something like 600 already approved solar and onshore wind farms that have got permission but no funding. They're waiting for grants from the government. So with the Russian situation with the oil and gas, we might see a loosening up of the grants for renewable energy projects. Hope we don't go down the fracking route. In terms of the actual grants, say, for solar on smaller scale, like households and businesses, I couldn't tell you the answer off the top of my head. I think that as I mentioned before, the acceleration, the rapid reduction we're going to need over a very short space of time means that there will be more grants coming. Absolutely, I believe that over time. But what you've got to be is ready to go. You don't want to then start thinking about when the grant comes out, you'll be too late. So invest now in thinking about, these are the schemes I want, this is how much it would cost, this is where we put it. And you're ready to go when grants do come available. And I think there's someone speaking later about funds.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, James Trainer, who will be speaking later about support and funding, has just said in the chat, visit the Locase website, www.locase.co.uk, and they can help with certain solar projects. So more about grants later on from James. There was also a question on how much it costs to involve a consultant to go green. I think I will suggest to all the attendees to contact Rufus and all the other speakers directly about that, and then you can have a further chat about how you can be helped and ultimately what the price tag for that is. If there's no further questions, thank you very, very much, Rufus. There's another one from Sean. Apart from reducing and improving lean, many of us will struggle to make big changes to energy use as we lease our buildings and landlords are not very sympathetic. How do we approach that one? Well,
depending on the leases, the opportunities are there certainly for. I've seen in the case of residents where they've got leases that are basically community buyouts. I don't know whether you can look at relocating to green energy parks. I don't know whether there's support from county council, but I think if you're having the issues, then look for other people that are having similar issues, because there's strength in numbers. And if you could perhaps team up with other businesses, then you might be able to look for sharing other premises, because sharing the costs of major infrastructure is definitely the way to go forward. Cooperation, industrial symbiosis, working with other businesses.
And perhaps from our side, we should be collecting those case studies to see how big that problem really is. Rufus, thank you once again